Out of all the sections of the French Constitution, none is more controversial than Article 49.3.
The 49.3.
49.3.
The provision allows the government to pass a bill through Parliament without a vote. Designed to prevent political gridlock, the article has become notorious in recent years as a way to circumvent democracy. When the government invoked Article 49.3 in 2023 to pass a law raising the retirement age, over 1 million people protested across France for almost half a year. So how did a couple sentences in the middle of the French Constitution come to be so divisive? And what does it mean for the future of French democracy? Let's go back to the beginning. The current French Constitution was created in 1958. Before that, France was under the Fourth Republic, formed hastily after the Second World War. The Fourth Republic concentrated most of its power in the Parliament and had a very weak executive branch. This was similar to the French government before the war, so the structure was carried over. However, the Fourth Republic was ultimately unable to provide the stability France needed. In its 12-year lifetime, it cycled through 16 prime ministers and 24 different cabinets. When the Algerian War of Independence broke out the next year, the institutional weakness of the Fourth Republic reached its breaking point. The structure of the Fourth Republic made it impossible to solve the crisis. Leadership was constantly changing, and when the parliament was divided, nothing could get done. In the midst of this chaos, there was only one man in France with the political legitimacy to restore order. Charles de Gaulle was France's greatest hero of the Second World War. In desperation, the last president of the Fourth Republic called on de Gaulle to come out of retirement and become the new prime minister. He also gave him the power to form a committee to rewrite the constitution. In September of that year, the new constitution was overwhelmingly approved by a nationwide referendum. The Fifth Republic was established, and de Gaulle was its first president.
Vive la République! Vive la France!
De Gaulle was determined to fix the weakness of the former republic. Like its predecessor, the Fifth Republic would have a bicameral legislature made up of the National Assembly and the Senate. But there would also be a powerful executive in the form of a president, elected by popular vote. The president would be the head of state in charge of national defense and foreign policy. Day-to-day operations would be handled by a prime minister and his government, which would also be in charge of drafting most of the laws that the National Assembly would vote on. Importantly though, the prime minister would be selected by the president, not by parliament, like in the Fourth Republic. This helped make the executive branch the most dominant part of the Fifth Republic. Even though the National Assembly could theoretically remove the prime minister and his government by passing a vote of no confidence, de Gaulle still made sure to give the president a large degree of power over the legislature in order to prevent the gridlock that had plagued the state. One of these powers includes a clause in the 49th article of the Constitution that allows the Prime Minister to pass a bill through the National Assembly without a vote. The original text of 49.3 said that the Prime Minister may, after deliberation by the Council of Ministers, commit the responsibility of the government before the National Assembly on the vote of a text. In this case, the text is considered adopted unless a motion of censure tabled within 24 hours is passed. The phrase, committing the responsibility of the government, means conducting a vote of no confidence.
Le gouvernement engage sa responsabilité.
If the vote succeeds, the Prime Minister and his government are removed, and the bill is blocked. But if not, then the bill becomes a law automatically. The intention was to allow the state to create legislation even if Parliament was divided. But the text was very vague. It didn't specify when this power could be evoked or for what purpose. In the beginning, 49.3 wasn't used very often. This changed when François Mitterrand became president in 1981. Mitterrand was the first socialist president of the Fifth Republic, and during most of his mandate, his party didn't have an absolute majority in parliament. This made it difficult for him to pass the legislation he wanted. He turned 49.3 into a tool to bypass opposition. Mitterrand's governments evoked Article 49.3 39 times throughout his presidency, more than all of his predecessors combined. After Mitterrand, however, there was a sharp decline in the use of 49.3, mainly because there was less of a need for it. Most presidents after Mitterrand enjoyed a parliamentary majority, but also, the article had become controversial, increasingly seen as a way for a president to circumvent the popular will expressed in the National Assembly. The state even reduced the power of 49.3 during the constitutional reforms of 2008. From then on out, the article could only be evoked once per legislative session, except for on bills about Social Security and budgets. And after 2006, French presidents had completely stopped using 49.3 entirely. All that changed in 2014 under François Hollande. At the end of the year, Hollande's government proposed an economic reform package nicknamed Macron's Law after Minister Emmanuel Macron. Even though the law would go on to be very popular with the public, Hollande's Prime Minister, Manuel Valls, was worried that the government couldn't get enough votes in the National Assembly to support the bill. So, in July of 2015, Hollande allowed him to use Article 49.3 to ram the bill through the legislature. And with that, Macron's law was enacted and a 9-year taboo had been broken. Manuel Valls would go on to use 49.3 a total of 6 times as prime minister. When Emmanuel Macron became president in 2017, he was determined not to resort to 49.3 and to stick to the traditional parliamentary route. He only used the article once during his first mandate, but during his second term, things would change dramatically. You see, after the 2022 French legislative elections, Macron's Ensemble coalition lost its majority in the National Assembly. It now became significantly more difficult for his government to pass legislation. So, like Mitterrand, he turned to 49.3 to overcome these issues. His Prime Minister, Elisabeth Borne, used the article 10 times during the last 2 months of the year. As is outlined in the Constitution, each time the article was evoked, a vote of no confidence was held in the National Assembly, and each time, the motion failed. This highlights one of the major issues with 49.3. In theory, Parliament can check the power of the executive through the motions of censure, but in practice, these votes are almost entirely unsuccessful. At the time, there had been only one successful vote of no confidence against a prime minister all the way back in 1962. Macron's actions drew heavy criticism of him and his government, and Borne was even nicknamed Madame 49.3. But nothing could have prepared them for the backlash that was about to come the very next year. On January 10, 2023, Macron's government announced a pension reform bill that would turn him into the most hated man in the nation. In France, citizens can receive a lifetime pension from the state after they reach the legal retirement age of 62, one of the lowest in Europe. The new law proposed changing the retirement age to 64. To the French, who are already taxed very highly for these generous pensions, Macron's proposal was outrageous. But, Macron argued, times were changing.
Au moment où moi je suis rentré dans la vie active, il y avait 10 millions de retraités. Il y en a aujourd'hui 17 millions. Dans les années 2030, il y en aura 20 millions. Est-ce que vous pensez qu'on peut continuer avec les mêmes règles?
The people weren't convinced, however, and they also pointed out that Macron had indeed previously promised not to raise the retirement age.
Est-ce qu'il faut reculer l'âge légal qui est aujourd'hui à 62 ans? Je ne crois pas.
With all of this backlash, it made it practically impossible for Macron and his allies to get enough votes for the bill. So, on March 16, 2023, he had Elisabeth Borne use 49.3 to pass it through. The outrage was instant. Within a week, over 1 million people demonstrated throughout the country, with over 100,000 people in Paris alone. Thousands of workers went on strike, paralyzing public services and transportation. It was so unpopular that when the standard vote of no confidence was held, the National Assembly was just 9 votes away from passing the resolution, a razor-thin margin. But the backlash grew so strong that Macron eventually announced that he would postpone the age increase until 2028. The political damage was already done, however. Macron had now cemented a reputation for not caring about the average French citizen and disregarding democracy when it served his interest.
l'Assemblée nationale. Ils ne veulent pas que j'augmente le bail. Et si je n'ai pas assez de voix, j'utiliserai le 49.3.
But this still didn't stop Macron from continuing to use 49.3. Elizabeth Borch would end up using it a total of 23 times as prime minister until she eventually had to resign in 2024 because of public anger. She was replaced with Gabriel Attal, who was then quickly replaced by Michel Barnier. Barnier had only been prime minister for a month when the government had trouble passing its proposed 2026 government budget. So, Barnier used 49.3 to push it through. This once again drew backlash for its anti-democratic methods, and the obligatory vote of no confidence was held in December. But this time, the motion went through. The National Assembly had ousted Barnier. It was the first time 49.3 had ever failed. The fact that the left and the right unified for this vote shows how increasingly unpopular the article was becoming. Michel Barnier was replaced by François Bayrou, who used the article 4 times in 9 months before also being voted out by Parliament over the same budget issue. Bayrou was then replaced by Sébastien Lecornu, who explicitly promised not to use 49.3 to pass the budget.
Et donc j'ai décidé de renoncer à l'article 49 alinéa 3 de la Constitution, puisque cet article, au fond, permet au gouvernement d'interrompre les débats, d'engager la responsabilité du gouvernement.
But when debate in the National Assembly stalled, he would go back on his promise and evoke the article 3 times to finally pass it through. 49.3 remains a highly contentious issue in French politics because it's so symbolic of the criticisms many people have with the current republic. Democracies often have to perform a balancing act between collective action and acting efficiently. If the Fourth Republic swung too firmly in one direction, to many people, the Fifth Republic has gone too far on the opposite side. There's a reason why some prominent French politicians have proposed creating an entirely new constitution, and, therefore, a new republic. But as long as the Fifth Republic is still around and Article 49.3 remains legal, it will no doubt continue to be used by presidents of all different parties. The power it gives the government is just too great to resist.